Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session that we're going to present to you today on 7 proverbs to help you fine-tune your content strategy as it pertains to your demand generation. For those of you who are wondering if you're sitting in the right session, because I think this is named a little different than it was in the agenda, you are in the right session. But as marketers, we appreciate packaging, and so we felt we could do a better job of trying to encapsulate what it is here that we hope to talk to you about today and kind of share some key learnings. So as Andrew mentioned, I'm Julie Brewer. I'm the Vice President of Demand Generation for Bottomline Technologies. My co-speaker is Stacy Gardner, who heads up marketing programs for one of our main lines of business. We're delighted to be speaking to you today on this topic. As Andrew mentioned, I think one of the things that kind of makes us uniquely positioned to talk to you on this topic is that we've had the pleasure of doing this not once but twice together, and at 2 very different companies in different states of maturity, and really kind of being part of an integral core team responsible for helping to build a true revenue marketing engine from the ground up. And so what we wanted to do is really just kind of try to boil down some of the key learnings that we have found to be consistent in spite of very different circumstances at 2 different companies, into 7 proverbs that we think are easy to remember, and hopefully there are some takeaways that each of you can garner from these learnings. So.
All right, we'll get started. So our first proverb, better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. So in short, always be sure to put a light on your content gaps. As revenue marketing individuals, you know, content is king. We're always dependent on content. And regardless of where you are in the maturity of your organization or within your company, you have some form of content, right? There's something there, whether it's just product sheets or maybe it's early stage infographics and such, there's something. So when Julie and I always work together on these content maps, the first thing that we do is just establish a baseline, which is go through a content mapping exercise and identify what content you have as it relates to the buy cycle. And in completing the content map, you have the opportunity to leverage what you do have. For instance, at Bottomline, when we first did a content map, we really saw a lot of late stage content. We knew immediately that we really needed to double down on early stage so that we could get net new prospects in the door. It obviously gives you an opportunity to repurpose and reuse. I think that's a theme that we've all heard a lot of the last couple of days, is making the most of your content. You know, we did when we started at Bottomline, we saw a lot of really heavy white papers that had great technical information and heavy product information, but there were nuggets there that we could steal and use for infographics and not have to reinvent the wheel entirely. It does also provide a central repository for all of your content to use across teams. You know, demand generation uses a content map. It's a living document that we keep live. The telesales uses it to nurture contacts. And most recently, we actually used the content map in our branding exercise. We went through a rebrand about a year ago. And it was nice to be able to take the content map, say, these are the programs and the assets that I know did the best. I know I need varying assets and varying stages of the buy cycle. Here, creative services, please brand these first. And so it really shortened our time to market in getting that rebranding effort done. And then ultimately, obviously, the content map really drives our demand generation activities. So just as a quick example, when Julie started, bless her heart, the first thing that she did when she started at Bottomline was to map all of our content. And she found about 270 assets, of which were predominantly product sheets and heavy technical material. About 20% were demand generation, where we felt confident we could put a form in front of it and actually drive some contact leads. And then of that, only 20% was really early stage. So we had a big content gap. Now I will say, for a content mapping exercise, I hate the content map. I really do. It's a laborious process. It's time consuming. Like, getting it off the ground is really painful. But when it's established and you consider it a living document and the adoption rate is high amongst your team, it's worth its weight in gold. I can go to the content map and look across lines of business and steal content from other lines of business just because it's in the content map. I don't even have to ask questions. I can just go and use it. So even though it is a really painful process to do it up front, it really does save your tail in the end.
Okay, so proverb number 2, one size fits all doesn't cut the mustard. So I think you've probably all experienced this in some capacity. For us, when we break up our content initiatives to support our demand gen key initiatives, we really kind of break it up into 3 core components. 1 being subject matter expertise, 2 being the actual content development, and 3rd being the creative development of kind of helping to bring that all together. And I think consistently what we have found is truly one size does not fit all, right? So whether it's your subject matter expertise, internal or external, or hopefully a blend of both, different subject matter experts are going to provide different points of view, different life experiences. Those are going to be valuable to the customers you're ultimately trying to reach. And so we have definitely found that kind of blending the mix and the perspectives is just really, really important to keeping the message fresh and continuing to ultimately keep the conversation going, even with those who've already engaged with you. On the content development side, not surprising to any of us as marketers, there's a wide range of writing styles. Don't settle for one. Right? Different content assets are going to be best brought out by different writing styles. So don't feel confined to kind of sticking to one. Really let the asset itself and the objective and the audience you're trying to reach help drive what might be right, and trial different approaches. Test it and measure it. And then 3rd, but definitely not least, is the creative development. So we've worked now at 2 companies where we do leverage a variety of outside resources to help us with our content development, our creative development, and looking for specialists in each of those key areas has really kind of been, I think, key to our success. One of the learnings that we had was kind of finding a core agency that offered a lot of the services that we were looking for, and maybe trying to drive too many of the projects through that engine. Where we ultimately landed is partnering with people who are truly specialists for the types of work and the scopes of work that we're looking to accomplish. So the way that we kind of approach this now is creating a stable or a bench of partners who really have proven their expertise in each of the key categories where we need that support. And it just starts with kind of identifying what those key areas are that you ultimately need to augment. Locating your shortlist, conducting your capabilities presentations, running small pilots. It's a great way to kind of test and make sure that the partnership is going to work and that you're going to get the results and the yield that you're looking for, and then ultimately develop your shortlist and kind of have your stable of partners both internally and externally.
So our 3rd proverb, leave no stone unturned. I think as demand generation and revenue marketing professionals, there are times when we're our own worst enemies. We get caught in our own jargon, and sometimes we come with a little bit of an inconsistent message. So one of the things that we were seeing in content development was that each one of us in the program's role had a different way about developing content with our partners, with our vendors, with our writers, and with our SMEs. I would go into a call differently with a SME than I would in the last one, and then it was inconsistent across teams as well. So we all came together and thought, we need to be consistent in the way that we ask time of our SMEs and ask time of our vendors and writers. So we've come up with an asset development brief, and it's just core questions. These are the core questions that we tackle before the actual kickoff call with the vendor or the writer, so that everyone is on the same page from a program's perspective. Julie knows what my intent for the asset is, and then we brief the SMEs. So everyone's on the same page with the goal, the objective, and what we're trying to tackle with this asset. And it really helps us in the end deliver content much more efficiently and effectively than we had in the past.
Okay, so proverb number 4, can't judge a book by its cover, except in marketing. So we know this to be true, right? Absolutely, our content is being judged by the way it's brought together and the packaging. From a content development perspective, we're constantly kind of checking the boxes to ensure that we are consistently finding ways to help us cut through the noise and get through to that audience that ultimately our competitors are also trying to vie for the attention of. We look for ways to try to trigger some type of an emotional connection with our intended audiences. People react and they feel more compelled when they can kind of feel that emotional connection to the topic that you're trying to convey. Taking the intended reader on a journey is really important, and I know it seems so obvious, so feel a little funny kind of stating it, but there's got to be a start, and there's got to be a middle, and ultimately there's got to be an ending, right? And we want to be sure that every time we're developing a piece, particularly that's going to help feed demand generation, that we're leaving the intended audience in a better place than when they started, right? So that they've definitely learned something, and we can assure that. And then just finding unique and varying ways to connect with that audience. Again, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, so find the topics that appear to be resonating and then trial them in different formats. But even if you do all of those things well, it's still not enough, because ultimately, even the best content isn't going to be consumed if it doesn't have a wrapper that draws the reader in and gets them engaged. So, certainly paying attention to titles and what they convey to your audience in terms of the what and the why. Using visuals to help guide the story along. We found in actually tested scenarios where, similar content presented in these two different formats, the ones with visuals oftentimes perform a lot better because people are time constrained, like we all are, and they look for things that are going to be easier to consume. Optimizing your collateral templates around kind of the objective of the piece. So I've experienced this at multiple companies that I've worked for where creative services team is off developing your core collateral templates, brochures, data sheets, case studies, white papers, whatever it is. And they're kind of doing that in isolation. That's just the wrong approach, right? So if we're looking at it from the customer's perspective and how they consume information, what they ultimately want to learn, and what we want to teach them when they look at pieces, we should absolutely be designing those templates to help aid that process. And then last but not least, creative wrappers. That's okay, you can leave it there. Creative wrappers are just really important. Stacy and I are fortunate enough to have a CMO, Christine Nernberger. She's in the audience today, and she's going to be speaking after this session in a different session. But testing creative themes and taking certain calculated risks and not being afraid to step outside the box. You're never going to really know what can be achieved unless you find ways to trial new things. And so with that in mind, I just wanted to share a couple of case studies. If you're anything like us, kind of appreciate seeing certain things in application as opposed to just hearing them talked about. So this is an example from our previous company where we were looking to really kind of drive widespread engagement with our brand because we were relatively unknown in the space that we were operating in. And just because holidays are a great time to kind of wrap some creative treatments around things, we worked with an agency to come up with this holiday resiliency campaign. It was 3 humorous videos that kind of centered around the notion of disaster recovery and IT availability. But it talked about holiday resiliency and going home for the holidays and how are you going to survive going home at the holidays with your crazy family. So they were really humorous. They were well received. Drove over 65,000 opens across the first 3 emails, and 73% of them were first-time responders, which is absolutely what we were looking to do, is get people who hadn't engaged with us in the past 6 months re-engage with us. More than 4,000 clicks and a much higher click-through rate than we were accustomed to for that audience. Also a Killer Content Award winner a couple years ago. This example, similarly, this one was unique in that we were going through a brand refresh, complete new brand identity, different logo, spinning off from parent company, so we needed to have a completely new color palette. And we were concerned about how to bridge the gap between the old brand and the new brand so that we didn't lose that loyalty and readership that we had worked so hard to gain. But the challenge here was, ultimately, we really didn't have anything to offer. We wanted them to acknowledge the new brand, but we weren't really giving them anything in return, in all fairness. So very soft call to action, which is basically visit our website. So we were hoping to impress the new brand visuals on them. We used kind of a humorous treatment again here, old cell phone, I'm sure many of you recognize. 1998 called and they want their website back. So just poking fun at ourselves, kind of a more outdated and archaic looking brand, and it worked. It drove really strong click-through engagement and ultimately delivered over 4,000 unique visits within the first 48 hours after our dropping that to our audiences. This is a more recent example. My colleague Andrea Eaton, who is also in the audience with us here today. So here she had developed a really strong infographic to help her reach her intended audience. The first time she sent out an email a few months ago, it had had good engagement, but always looking for ways, again, to kind of continue to up the ante a little bit. So she had an idea to kind of leverage the New Year's Eve theme and apply kind of a creative packaging around how to get people to engage with that infographic. So, kind of attention-grabbing headline, ring in the new, retire the nuisances, and it was all centered around this 7 phrases for AP to retire in 2016. So again, what did that mean for her? A lot more downloads of this particular asset that she had already featured to the same audience months prior, increased click-through rate, and increased click-to-open rate. And then last but not least, here's an example. This is actually a campaign that Stacy developed to support her line of business. Again, strong content offer, best practice guide, based in thought leadership. We were looking to drive this into a very targeted audience of kind of high-ranking bank officials, so very finite audience of people, in work to kind of pull together a more attention-grabbing kind of visual to help queue up the best practice guide. And then it was sent out through a third party who actually had the subscriber base that we were hoping to impress upon. And within 48 hours received just phenomenal feedback from the third party media partner, 48% click to open rate, which even by industry benchmarks for kind of our area or industry is well above best in class. So we were just really, really pleased with that. And this won us a Killer Content Award today. So great job.
Number 5, though the path is long, it need not be narrow. I won't belabor on this slide very long because I think it's repetitive of a lot of what we've heard from the sessions this week, which is really just maximizing the use of every asset that you create. I think many of you in the audience feel the same as I do after 6 to 8 weeks of creating an asset with the SMEs and with the writer or the vendor, whatever, like you're exhausted and you take a giant breath of relief when it's finally done. It's finally done. And though the hard work and the heavy lifting really is done, the optimization and the opportunity with that asset has really just begun. I will say on this, when you are sharing your assets via multiple channels, we're always really cognizant to measure our results for each channel. For instance, this little asset that we have up here, the 5 myths, it did really well in our content syndication programs that we had with the vendor, but I featured it in a customer email nurture program and it was kind of a bust. And I wouldn't say a bust, it was just kind of flat. So had I just taken the results from the email campaign and said, it's not really resonating with the audience and not taken snippets to a third party, I would have lost what was an opportunity of some heavy lifting creating a net new asset. I'll say too, though this is very asset related, we take the same approach with communicating to the sales team. So if you think about a program in the middle, we then send campaign alerts, asset alerts, weekly digests, and quarterly updates, as well as sit on staff calls, just to communicate the use of the asset and where it's making an impact and the results that they're gonna see. So not only distribute the asset, but also communicate to the team how you're distributing it, because they can also amplify the message, but just keeping them in know as well.
Okay, I'm going to try to speed it up because I think we're down to the last 10 minutes or so. Proverb number 6, no need to reinvent the wheel. Again, not going to belabor this point. I know you guys have heard a lot about it at the conference over the last couple of days, and I don't think this is a new concept to any of us. But the reality that we know we're operating in is that there's probably a very finite number of topics that your audience is going to find interesting and that uniquely are mapping back to your value proposition. So where you find them and where you're seeing good engagement, that's where repurpose, reuse, recycle, upcycle really comes into play. Testing different forms, a couple of just quick case studies of this in kind of practice. This started off as a blog article that was authored by one of our product marketing folks, featured on our corporate blog. It became the inspiration for an executive brief. It was just a 2-page front and back. The content was literally taken verbatim, so there was no updates, no changes. It was appropriate. Just put it into a different template, used call-outs and typography and different design treatments to kind of pull forward some of the key messages and learnings. And then down the road, we ultimately took the content and translated it into an infographic as well. Both performed really well, but the executive brief, ironically enough, ended up being one of the top converting assets that drove really quality conversations that ultimately led to closed business. So, great example of how it just feeds this continuous cycle of content that we need to develop. Another example of repurpose and reuse on the left-hand side, this is another theme campaign that we produced at our former company. It started with kind of this notion of leveraging a zombie apocalypse to help reinforce messages around disaster recovery and preparedness. And it was all coincided around Halloween because we wanted to, kind of leverage that holiday for this entertainment value type campaign that connected back to a very serious business message. So developed a survival guide, an infographic, saw really great engagement, again, particularly with people who we had had a difficult time engaging with. Ultimately, several months down the road, timed kind of a resurgence of this campaign, but brought it into a new look and feel to coincide with the upcoming then World War Z, starring Brad Pitt. So kind of leveraging the fact that that was trending, produced kind of another host of assets that continued to live on. This campaign went on for more than 12 months, garnered several awards across content and creative. So again, just a really good use case of repurposing and reusing the same content.
And last but not least, converting the nonbelievers. So often as marketers, we continue to speak in our marketing jargon. We speak to raw inquiries, we speak to KPIs and campaign performance. But ultimately, as a revenue marketer, if we're aligning ourselves with the sales revenue targets, we have to switch the conversation from a marketing conversation to a business conversation. I recently was walking into a meeting with our SVP, and it was a first half recap, second half plan and adjustments. I was a little bit nervous because it's been going a little bit hairy. And coincidentally, right before I walked into the call, one of his direct reports called me, and he said, "Stacy, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what you're doing in marketing. I don't know what's going on." And I really sat back. It really took me back. It wasn't a good call. But then it really got me thinking. I'm sending all these campaign alerts. I'm sitting on the staff calls. I'm sitting on the leadership calls. Like, how many times can I communicate this message and then have his direct reports tell me they don't know what's going on? And it finally dawned on me, though we had been building this revenue marketing engine for a year and a half, we hadn't switched the conversation. We were still talking about marketing inquiries and leads passed and all that stuff. I hadn't switched it to a business conversation. So though the call wasn't my favorite, at least prepared me going into the next call with the SVP, in which we shared this quick diagram. And really it's the why you should care about content. From a sales perspective, they don't care. Like, are you hitting and impacting my pipeline or not? So I took him through this and I said, this is why we ask your team to commit to time in developing content. Because if we have really solid content, we're breaking through the noise, we have a point of view, we have an attitude in the market, ultimately that's driving net new inquiries and net new leads. It's going through the telefunction. But ultimately, we're driving opportunities with pipeline that your team can grab onto and convert. Your team isn't spending 6 months trying to convert a net cold lead into someone that might be interested. Marketing is taking that heavy lifting off of your plate and delivering you opportunities that are ready to convert to pipeline. We've taken that all away from your team. They're not dialing for dollars, and that's why content matters to you. And I felt like there was a moment there where we might be hook, line, and hook, line, and sinker on that one. So it was a positive conversation. And what I've promised to him going forward is, on a monthly basis, I now provide him a leadership dashboard. And the dashboard is, here are the marketing metrics on one slide, and the next slide is the dashboard. Here's the pipeline that we've produced for you in the last month. Here are the net opportunities. Here's what going directly to your sales team. Here's what's our influence rate is. And then I do a net change month over month, quarter over quarter, and year to date. So this lets him see how we're trending, where we're making an impact, and it's a great alignment to, he asked me about 6 months ago to make a little shift in product focus, and though reluctant, it made sense for the business, and we did. And thanks to this dashboard, I can now show him, you asked us to shift, we did, and we're impacting the pipeline positively, and that is a great conversation to have with your sales team so that you move away from why content matters. Here's some inquiries. All of those conversations, it's just noise. It's got to become the business conversation. So I think that last but not least, just encourage you, if you are creating a revenue marketing engine, to think end results. How can I make this real for sales leadership or line of business executives as well?
Okay, so just to summarize kind of the key points that we've talked about here today, I think the final proverb that we will leave you with from our view of things is just that content marketing is a journey, not a destination. What we mean by that is we're going to continue to learn and get more efficient and calibrate and optimize forever. It never ends, right? That cycle is just always continuing, and hopefully we're continuing to learn more about our audiences and what's important to them, and morphing the message as it's appropriate to connect with them. So recapping, starting with number 1, better to light a candle than curse the darkness.
You never liked that proverb. You didn't like it from the start.
I know, I've never heard of that one. So it's different. But it makes good sense, and it really is about just doing the hard work. If you haven't done it, or if you haven't done it in a while, do the content audit. Take inventory of what you have, figure out what you can repurpose or want to continue to reuse, sunset the stuff that you don't. But it just becomes really, really important to kind of setting up and making sure that you've got the right assets aligned to support your initiatives, and also, more importantly, to make sure you can go out and fill the gaps. Number 2, one size fits all doesn't cut the mustard, so I think you guys get it, whether it's the content development, the creative development, or the subject matter expertise that you're looking for or ultimately leveraging to help you develop solid content. One size doesn't fit all, so trial different approaches, different types, different subject matter experts who offer unique points of view. Number 3, leave no stone unturned. This just speaks to the importance of you cannot be over-prepared when it comes to ensuring a really solid kickoff call. I think the one thing that Stacy and I have both learned, multiple occasions that made this one really important in our mind, even though it seems really obvious, is you're the sponsor of this content initiative. You're probably the one who's putting up budget for it to support one of your campaigns. You've got to make sure that the key stakeholders understand what's expected of them, hold them accountable to that everybody knows their place in this. One bad kickoff call where you've wasted your subject matter expert's time because the writer didn't come prepared to ask the right questions, or it somehow went in the wrong direction, it will be the last time that subject matter expert ever comes to the table to help again. So make it a fluid process, make sure the writer gets what they need during that call, and you'll be in a much better place. Number 4, can't judge a book by its cover. Who said that? Of course you can, and we are being judged this way. So when it comes to content marketing, packaging just matters. So try new approaches. Again, don't be afraid to kind of think outside the box and trial some new things. Hopefully you work in an environment where some of that is supported. Number 5, though the path is long, it need not be narrow. Speaks to the importance of using various channels to promote your content, help amplify the message, and then ultimately measure which messages and which formats are working in which channels so that you kind of got that humming. Number 6, no need to reinvent the wheel, repackage, reuse, recycle. And number 7, convert the nonbelievers. Ultimately, again, when you're talking about it in practice, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but once you start to see the results and you can measure that, and you can bring forward that conversation in a new way to shed light on the impact that you are having, you're going to convert the nonbelievers. So with that, we thank you. Our contact information is up. If you have any questions, Stacy and I are happy to field questions after the fact. I know we don't have time. Thank you.